ผมขอขอบคุณกรมศิลปากรที่เชิญผมมาพูดเรื่องการขุดค้นที่บ้านเชียงในปีพ.ศ. 2517 กับพ.ศ. 2518 รวมทั้งนี้พูดเรื่องประวัติศาสตร์ของการศึกษาวิจัยที่นี่ด้วยผมโชคดีมากตลอด46 ปีที่ได้รับการสนับสนุนจากกรมศิลปากรและได้รับอนุญาตให้ศึกษาวิจัยในประเทศไทยในปีพ.ศ. 2512 ผมทำงานในภูเวียงจังหวัดขอนแก่นและจังหวัดร้อยเอ็ดภายใต้การสนับสนุนจากอธิบดีแคปิตันสมภพพิรมในปีพ.ศ. 2524 อธิบดีเดโจสวนานนท์ได้มาเยี่ยมการขุดค้นบานาดีอยู่บริเวณบ้านเชียงจังหวัดอุดรในปีพ.ศ. 2528 อธิบดีทวิศักดิ์เสนานารงค์ได้มาเยี่ยมการขุดค้นกกพนมดีซึ่งคณะนี้กำลังสร้างพิพิธภัณฑ์ที่นั่นหลังจากพ.ศ. 2528 ตลอด20 ปีที่ผ่านมาผมยังได้รับการสนับสนุนจากอธิบดีนิคมมูสิกคามะอาวุธเนืองจกรินเครียงไร่สัมปัจจลิตสมสุดาลียานาวานิชสหวัตเนนาและอเนกสีหามาศในการขุดค้นบริเวณแม่น้ำมูลทอนบอนและให้เงินพิมพ์รายงานการขุดค้น6 เล่มภายใต้อธิบดีอนันต์จุโชตผมและคณะยังคงได้รับการสนับสนุนให้ดำเนินงานศึกษาวิจัยอยู่ Ladies and gentlemen, normally when I give a lecture, like Stephen Young, I just talk. The last time I read a lecture was in 1983 at the British Academy, and the title of my paper then was Ban Chieng in Wider Perspective. Today I'm going to break with my normal tradition, and I'm going to read it again. And the reason why I am going to read it again is twofold. First, I want to go relatively slowly because I would like to help the simultaneous translation. And second, I have a great deal that I really want to say. And I find in retrospect, after I have given an extempore lecture and not reading it, that I forgot things and left them out. So I'm going to read it slowly. One of the most rewarding aspects of my 46 years of involvement in Thailand's past is to have played a small part in revealing one of the most innovative and stimulating prehistoric sequences known. Today, I will describe my involvement in the excavation at Ban Chieng in 1974-5, before attempting to place this site in its overall cultural context, both in northeast Thailand and in Southeast Asia. In doing so, let me mention and then set aside two difficulties, for we are here to celebrate Ban Chieng and not trawl over disagreements of interpretation. Ban Chieng was so severely looted in the 1970s that a huge quantity of artifacts, mainly pottery vessels and bronzes, were unearthed by villagers for sale. Therefore, when we excavated there was little left that was intact, and the excavations were confined to the backyard of a house and within a narrow lane. We therefore have a dilemma, a massive collection of artifacts without cultural context, scattered across the globe, many in private hands, that contrasts with the very small excavations for which we have as yet no final report. I will therefore tell the Banqiang story as I remember it, before assessing its current place in piecing together Thailand's past. When I began my first season of archaeological research in northeast Thailand in 1969, we worked on a most exciting frontier. Wilhelm Solheim and Don Bayard had published claims for the earliest bronze technology in the world, following the 1966 to 1968 excavations at Non Nok Ta. At Ban Chiang, Pot Gyeonggorn, Vidya Interkosai, and Nikom Sutirak had uncovered burials containing remarkable painted ceramic vessels associated with very early dates. Some specialists in early metallurgy accepted these claims, and others did not. In 1972, I was excavating at Banyan Valley Cave with my friend Chet Gorman, in Mae Hong Son. And there it is. It was a wonderful place to work. As I recall it, we walked through the jungle to get to Banyan Valley Cave. It took a day to get there. We drank from the streams. We heard the wild elephants. We even heard tigers. And when we got to the cave, there was Chet there to welcome us. It was a most wonderful experience for me. And we had a very interesting excavation, as you can see, as well. When we returned to Mae Hong Son, Chet received a telegram from Fröhlich Rainey, director of the Pennsylvania University Museum, asking him to visit him in Bangkok. On his return, Chet told me that he had been asked to join the museum staff in Philadelphia and direct a major new excavation at Ban Chiang. The University of Pennsylvania was ranked 17th best in the world this year, and the University Museum has an international reputation for working in the world's greatest sites, Ur of the Chaldees, Tikal. Rainey saw Gorman's appointment as the way to involve his museum in the prestigious uncovering of the world's earliest evidence for one of the greatest of mankind's discoveries, metallurgy. Chet did not want to leave Mae Hong Son. Of that, I am certain. We were great friends and colleagues, and we discussed the pros and cons of this new venture. It's conceivable that I had some little influence on his decision, and through the mists of time, I think I can recall him saying that if we did it together, he'd accept. Of course, he did move to Philadelphia, and with Pisit Charoen Wong as co-director, plans were formulated. The Ford Foundation agreed to fund a training program as part of the research endeavor, and Chet and Pisit kindly invited Mike Pietrzewski and me and others to join their team. And there we are, at least some of us. Chet in the red shirt in the middle, Pisit you will recognize at once from seeing him just now. The 1974-5 fieldwork at Ban Chiang, as I said, faced a serious problem. There was a large American base at Udon. Busloads of servicemen came out to Ban Chiang when off duty, and many returned with a pot or a bronze. Every back garden, every open plot of land outside the temple was being looted. There was little intact for us to excavate. In the first season, we worked in the undisturbed yard of a house. And in the second season, we moved to a narrow village lane in an intact area opened previously by Nikom. Both excavations were therefore very small. In 1975, and you can see it in front of you, it was just 3.5 meters wide. In Nikom's unfinished square next to us, the burials had not been lifted. And we looked down into a pit filled with skeletons. Chet and I climbed down and at the bottom found a skeleton still wearing a couple of bronze bangles. The excavations in 1974 revealed a sequence that began with very few Neolithic, that is, pre-bronze burials, then bronze and iron occupation and burials. I don't recall finding any famous painted pots, but perhaps this will be confirmed when we have access to a report on our excavations there. I do remember to this day the thrill of tracing the outline of a bronze axe on the shoulder of one skeleton, and then moving down the left arm and finding a set of bronze bracelets. A year later, in the narrow lane, the sequence also involved bronze and iron occupation and burials.
Formed the center point of an article on the prehistoric dogs from Banqiang, which revealed, without any doubt, that it was descended from a wolf. A breath of relief, a sigh of relief, as it comes out in one piece. Now for packaging. There was always the possibility that this dog was domesticated from the local jackal. There are no indigenous wolves in Southeast Asia. The fact
that was just an example of the minute and meticulous care with which Chet and Pisit conducted the excavation. Again, during this season, painted pots were very rare. I leave it to your imagination to share the feeling as Ampan Kijingamanai slowly revealed the form and the decoration of this particular vessel. As I say, Chet was a meticulous excavator, and with Pisit, he developed a detailed recording system in which every new layer or part thereof was mapped. Each burial was drawn and recorded before being photographed. You can see on this single plan here that was given me by Chet, the very detailed recording, layer by layer, that was undertaken during the course of our excavations there. Villagers and students from Silapakon University combined to excavate. The excavations during both seasons were demanding technically. The cultural deposits had been mixed, largely a result of water deposition, flooding, insect activity, and the human digging of pits, graves, and post holes. When the two excavation seasons were finished, all finds were transported to the University Museum in Philadelphia for analysis. One of the first objectives was to obtain a secure chronology and see if it confirmed the very early contexts for the initial Bronze Age already published from Non-Noktar, and the radiocarbon samples were dated. The results, published by Gorman and Charan Wong in 1976, supported the early chronology for bronze technology with an initial proposed date of 3600 BC for bronze. Moreover, it went further, placing the initial use of iron smelting in the period 1600 to 1200 BC. These results confirmed the world significance of Banqiang. They were accepted by the senior specialists at the University Museum in Philadelphia. This is what two of them said. Dr. James Muley wrote in 1976 as follows: China was important, for it was also held that once bronze metallurgy developed there, it spread from China to other parts of the East. This meant that bronze metallurgy came to Thailand no earlier than the early first millennium BC. Compare this to a date of 3600 BC, now proposed for a bronze spearhead from Banqiang, and you have some idea of the magnitude of the challenge to traditional theory now underway. Fro Rainey wrote, after Chet's death, about Chet, his excavations at Banqiang in Thailand have proved that Southeast Asia was one of the earliest centers for the development of the basic techniques of civilized living, and perhaps the region where men first discovered the methods of manufacturing metals. That discovery is altering many of our theories about the history of human activity. The University of Pennsylvania Museum authorities accepted and publicized this great new discovery. The New Scientist of the 10th of June 1976 wrote under the headline, "Early Thai Metallurgy predates Middle East finds," as follows: "The cornucopia of ancient artifacts around the village of Ban Chiang in northern Thailand that was announced a few weeks ago by the University of Pennsylvania Museum has produced a set of new and intriguing conundrums for archaeologists. The finds, dated by thermoluminescence and radiocarbon at up to 5,500 years old, indicate the presence of sophistication, a people who knew bronze metallurgy around the same time as the Mesopotamians, who smelted iron contemporaneously with the Hittites and painted pottery before the Chinese. The most ancient relic is a bronze spear point dated firmly at 3,600 BC, the most ancient radiocarbon-dated artifact ever discovered. Overall, states a museum announcement, the data point to an indigenous development of bronze and iron metallurgy in Thailand, which took place earlier than similar developments in India or China, and paralleled in time early metallurgy in the Middle East. On the 31st of May 1976, Time magazine reported that bronze was made at 3,600 BC, along with pictures of the spearhead and the Thai and American archaeologists who excavated Ban Chiang. The Reader's Digest, with a circulation of over 30 million, in 1980 asked, "Where was the cradle of civilization?" The answer must be Thailand, because bronze metallurgy being in place at 3,600 BC. It is entirely understandable, given the impact of this publicity, that the world significance of Ban Chiang was accepted in Thailand. In 1980, the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Project for Archaeology and Fine Arts issued a New Year greeting card with a photograph of Ban Chiang painted pots and glass beads with the legend, "Prehistoric period 4,000 to 6,000 BC." The Fine Arts Department issued an official greetings card with a photo of two painted Ban Chiang pots with spiralic decoration and the legend, "Prehistoric Metal Age 5,000 BC." It has to be said that not everybody accepted these claims. There was widespread cynicism in Europe, and the Australian archaeologist Helmut Loosvisova, with his own experience of excavating at Kokcharen and Utong, wrote in 1986 that one cannot help but being flabbergasted by it all. In not much more than a decade, what was only a theory held by 2 or 3 archaeologists on the basis of some erroneous and misinterpreted radiocarbon dates had become common knowledge, and all this without going through any stage of rigorous scientific scrutiny. And he wasn't alone. In 1978, I visited the University Museum to work on some of the finds that were my particular responsibility. There was a universal sense there of a verve and excitement. A traveling exhibition was being planned by a second great American museum, the Smithsonian, bringing the sensational new finds to a world audience. A question I asked myself, and others too have asked it, is, was Ban Chiang the only site in Udon? My colleague, who worked with me at Ban Chiang, Dr. Ampan Kijngam, and I decided to follow up our involvement at Ban Chiang with a survey to find more prehistoric sites. We chose to search in the flat rice lands round Lake Kumpawapi, just south of Ban Chiang. We found many sites, but sadly the looters had usually got there first. However, we chose the village of Ban Ardi and excavated there in 1981. We found evidence for Bronze and Iron Age occupation, industrial activities, and human graves that corresponded to the latter part of the sequence at Ban Chiang. We were fortunate that the stratigraphy was very clear. Bronze Age burials had been laid out, as at Banqieng, in rows, and over time they formed a sequence. There were remarkable mortuary offerings, the earliest known human models in Thailand. Splendid clay cattle, deer, and elephant figurines. A child buried under a crocodile skin shroud, a crocodile presumably hunted at Lake Kumpawapi nearby. In essence, it was like Banqieng's baby brother, a very interesting prehistoric site with fascinating finds. We also encountered hearths and the furnaces that were used to bring copper and tin to melting point. Both contained charcoal, and we obtained a set of radiocarbon dates. These were significantly later than the equivalent layers from Banqieng. Clearly, further research was needed to resolve this contradiction. But as we worked at Barnardi, tragedy struck. Chet was diagnosed with terminal cancer. This he told me in a letter that ended with a request for me to take responsibility to analyze and publish our excavations at Banqieng. He informed the then director of the University Museum of his wish, and I was invited to Philadelphia to review progress and submit a report on the status of the analyses and a timetable. En route, I visited Chet in Sacramento, where he advised me on how to progress and in preparing our final report, and this just weeks before he died. I felt that a report on the 2 seasons might take about 3 years, particularly if Pisit Charoen Wong was involved in all stages of the research. I also made it clear that our report would be a memorial volume to my friend, Chester Gorman, that would acknowledge his magnificent contribution to Thai prehistory. This was agreed by the director of the museum, Professor Martin Biddle. I returned at the museum's invitation in 1982 to start work. I was informed on my arrival that Robert Dyson, the new director, intended to keep the analysis and publication of the site within the museum, and he subsequently appointed one of Chet's graduate students to take charge. This was a challenging responsibility. Prehistoric Thai sites can be very deep, complex, and by no means easy to interpret. Moreover, Gorman's successor as director of the Banqieng project took charge when the museum authorities still viewed Banqieng as a site of outstanding world significance, largely due to the very early published dates for rice farming and metallurgy, both bronze and iron. This was reinforced by the agreement of the Smithsonian Institution to organize a traveling exhibition to spread this news. There must have been huge pressure on the new director of the Banqieng project to maintain this momentum. However, Luce Visova again expressed the contrary view when he described this as a remarkably successful exercise of public opinion forming by the media, manipulated, or at least condoned, by a handful of archaeologists and being based on very questionable evidence. Without a full and detailed report, he concluded, this is not science, but science fiction. Archaeologists rely on sections through a site to reveal its cultural sequence. With the copies of the site plans given me by Chet Gorman, I've put together such a section for the 1975 sequence. It begins with one Neolithic burial, followed by an early and a later Bronze Age cemetery, and finally the Iron Age. You can see the layers in front of you. There are also occupation deposits such as pits, post holes, and the occasional hearth and bronze casting furnace. Archaeologists also have to provide, publish, and interpret a chronological framework for what they have found. So I must spend now a few minutes only to describe how our understanding of the chronology for Banqiang has evolved, beginning with the radiocarbon dates from charcoal that led to claims of 3600 BC for the early bronzes. Two crucial points must be stressed. Radiocarbon laboratories now issue a warning over charcoal dates because the charcoal could come from an old tree and provide a result that is much earlier than the event being dated. This is known as inbuilt age. If you have other material for dating, don't use charcoal. The second is that the charcoal has to come from an undisturbed context, such as a hearth or a furnace used to produce molten copper. At Banqiang, there were very few such intact contexts containing charcoal sufficient in those days to obtain radiocarbon dates. We encountered one or two hearths, but most radiocarbon samples came from fragments of charcoal accumulated from the contents of human burials. These are obviously, please make the next movie. These are obviously disturbed. You're digging a human grave, you dig a hole, you put the body in, you replace the soil. No voice, just go. This is how most samples for dating at Banqiang were collected. You can see here the bones of a prehistoric person, and the excavator is moving down the bone, and in doing so, as you can see here, finds a fragment of charcoal. And that fragment of charcoal will now be carefully moved without holding it or handling it to disturb it in any way and contaminate it into the waiting aluminium foil over there. And as the exercise proceeds, so it is hoped that sufficient charcoal will be found to provide, in those days, enough for radiocarbon dates. Well, most of our dates in the 1974-5 excavation seasons come from such contexts. And let us now look at the actual dates obtained on charcoal that led and underwrote the University of Pennsylvania Museum's publicity campaign. They defy rational interpretation. On this slide here, the actual date is running along the bottom, and the samples are running along the top. So the earliest radiocarbon dates are at the bottom, and the latest are at the top. Thank you. Most, as I say, come from uncertain contexts, and I've highlighted two in red. This is the first, and that's the second. And that is the date for the burial containing the famous spear from burial 76. This, the bronze spear, described in the New Scientist as that with a date firmly at 3600 BC, the most ancient radiocarbon dated artifact ever discovered. The University Museum of this date said in 1986 that the description of the location of this specimen in relation to burial 76 suggests as strong an association of charcoal with a burial as can be found at the site. The radiocarbon date is 1135 BC to AD 13. That is 2,500 years later than the advertised 3,600 BC. Pennsylvania has had the greatest difficulty accounting for this, writing in 1984 that this date is unaccountably young for context and grave style. The second highlighted date, in red, comes from a hearth in the lowest layer of the 1975 excavation season. Its date, 875 to 1115 BC. Again, this does not lend support to 3600 BC for early bronze. Here you can see the hearth in question, again, in this section through the site. There it is, 1000 BC. There's a burial there coming across here, and that burial cut down to this layer has to be later than that date. And that date in the lowest layer, as I say, is 875 to 115 BC. Again, this does not lend support to 3600 BC for early bronze. These are difficulties that required further research. Radiocarbon dating became much more precise and required far smaller samples with the arrival of AMS dating. This technique requires far smaller samples. You can even date a rice grain. We turned therefore to dating sites on the basis of the plant remains, including rice, that had been used to temper the clay in prehistoric pottery vessels. This is a section through a pot, and the black stuff here is organic rice that was used to temper the clay in making the pot. I used this technique at Nong Nor, Ian Glover at Bandon Tapet. At Philadelphia, Banqiang was redated as well. Pre-treating the sample is crucial in this technique. In one, fragments of rice were carefully removed and dated, and in the other, potsherds were crushed and dated. The results show an alarming inconsistency, even for the same pot. The 4 dates from pure rice are much later, the ones in red, these ones here, much later than the results with clay included, even when they come from the same burial. The former, that is the late ones, were rejected in Philadelphia as being too late. And here you can see some of the statements that were made in interpreting these pure rice dates based on AMS dating. The husk date is younger than archaeological expectations. The husk dates are barely extending to the anticipated archaeologically acceptable date. The husk date is substantially too young. The husk date just overlaps the younger end of the expected range, and the husk dates without clay included were therefore set to one side.